I would like to share with you regarding to the sustainable blue economy, and actually blue economy is one of the pathways towards net zero emissions. The thing is that why we have to transition into a blue economy, because actually we have to transform, and we need a more sustainable sources of growth. And one of the key things is that why Indonesia really concerned in developing blue economy, because Indonesia is actually archipelagic countries, and we have abundant ocean resources that can be utilized and improved for the welfare of the people of our country. So I would like also to share with you that actually there is no blue without green. And actually blue economy is the way that we would like to improve the value added of our economy. But the thing is that we also concerned with the sustainability of our environment. So blue economy is central to the implementation of green economy. And the blue economy is also one way that we can create value chain, and then and ensure that the economic development can be implemented in a more inclusive way. And blue economy is also a concern by offering both socio-economic and environmental value into improving the value chain and creating a more inclusive and more sustainable economic growth. So actually oceans provides environmental services critical to the achievement of SDGs. Oceans can provide us foods, water, such as clean water, and help secure adequate supply of clean water to the terrestrial, to the community. And also communities is having responsibility to protect our nature, which is ocean. So above of that, that ocean is also consisting of abundant ecosystems such as mangroves, seagrasses, and coral reefs, which is potential to achieve a net zero emission. Mangroves, seagrasses, and coral reefs have an important role in absorbing CO2 from the air. As you know that, for example, that if we have seagrass area of 1.8 million hectare, and then every 1 hectare of seagrass can store 6.6 tons of carbon, or the equivalent of 24.2 tons of CO2 gases. And mangroves can absorb and store more carbon than other forest ecosystem. So that's the one of the advantages of ocean environment, ocean ecosystem that can contribute to the achievement of net zero emission. And we have challenges, but again, we have a lot of opportunity, and some barriers is still being faced by us. And then we have, for example, some barriers for implementing the blue economy still remain, such as inadequate ocean governance arrangements, unsustainable use of marine resources, and limited capacity of our people to utilize oceans in a more inclusive and sustainable way. Even though we have some barriers, but still our effort now and in the future is to really put forward blue economy development in Indonesia. For your information, that we have put it up into during our G20 presidency, and then during ASEAN chairmanship as well. We are now in the process of developing the ASEAN Blue Economy Framework initiated by Indonesia, and then it will be the flagship of ASEAN chairmanship in 2023. Why blue economy matters for Indonesia? Because blue economy is one of the modalities for the development in Indonesia. Indonesia is actually consisted of 17,500 islands, which is connected by sea, and 290,000 square meter is actually territorial of sea area. and 65% of the total Indonesia's area is covered by the sea. And we have 80,700 kilometers of coastline and 3 million kilometers per square, 3 million kilometers square of exclusive economic zone. And within the exclusive economic zone of Indonesia, Indonesia has the right to manage and utilize all its ocean resources for the purposes of exploration, exploitation, conservation, and the development of natural resources. This is actually famous as the Juanda Declaration in 1957. So with the huge potential of our oceans and blue economy becoming very important for Indonesia. Blue economy in Indonesia, that Indonesia's ocean economy has an annual worth of more than 280 billion US dollar. And we also a lot of potential of reef tourism, marine fishing, and also we can employ approximately around 7 million people to work related to the ocean. And blue economy also has the potential for improving the economic growth, but at the same time, blue economy is also a tool to achieve sustainable development. Why? Because when we are implementing blue economy, then there are around 9 goals out of 17 goals of SDGs can be addressed. Blue economy is connected to goal number 1, no poverty, number 2, 7, 8, 9, 12, 13, 14, and 17. And at the same time, blue economy can prevent and significantly reduce marine pollution. But at the same time, blue economy also can increase the economic value added, which is very important to improve the welfare of the people. So again, blue economy will lay the groundwork of strategies for the Indonesian economic transformation. For your information, Indonesia is now in the process of transforming the Indonesian economy, and blue economy is one of the future engine of Indonesian economic growth, because Indonesia has an aspiration to escape from the middle income trap before 2045. And then we need a new engine of economic growth. And blue economy will be one of the new sources of the economic growth for the Indonesian economy. This is what Indonesia have promoted for blue economy environment. There are enabling policy framework for promoting blue economy in Indonesia. Indonesia has key policy instruments which provide the basis for the implementation of blue economy roadmap. One is Indonesian Ocean Policy, released in 2017. And there are 6 basic principles of Indonesian Ocean Policy: archipelagic outlook, sustainable development, blue economy, integrated and transparent management, participation, equality, and equitability. Number 2 is Indonesia actually really committed to the implementation of sustainable development goals, and where blue economy can address the achievement of many goals in the SDGs. And number 3, Indonesian Vision 2045, mentioning that 12.5% maritime economy will be achieved by 2045. So with that, we will develop an efficient and effective marine connectivity. Number 2 is sustainable and competitive fishing industrialization and inclusive marine tourism. And number four is that in the National Medium-Term Development Plan for 2020 to 2024, blue economy has been mentioned explicitly in our Medium-Term Development Plan. We have the policy and the strategic direction to develop and to expand a sustainable blue economy, and and it will provide a significant contribution to the achievement of our medium-term development plan and the vision of 2045. Indonesia, during the ASEAN Leaders Declaration in 2021, Indonesia also support the Blue Economy ASEAN Leaders Declaration in 2021 under the chairmanship of Brunei Darussalam. And number 6, for your information, Indonesia has launched the Blue Economy Development Framework for Indonesia's economic transformation. And this framework provides the main basis for the development of Blue Economy Roadmap in Indonesia. For your information, Indonesia now is finalizing the Blue Economy Roadmap that will be launched sometime in early July 2023 during on the sideline of the ASEAN chairmanship. And this Blue Economy Development Framework is the basis for us to build the Blue Economy Roadmap of Indonesia. And for your information, that this is the future pathway for Blue Economy Development in Indonesia. Indonesia is now transforming the Indonesian economy with these 6 strategies. And then for your information, that Blue Economy is actually belong to and then include in strategy number 2 for improving the economic sector productivity. So Blue Economy is actually a very important tool for Indonesia to improve the productivity and also to be a new engine of the future Indonesian economy. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have Blue Economy Development Framework, and Blue Economy Framework of Indonesia is actually published already. You can access it from the online platform. And from this Blue Economy Framework, we are now finalizing the Blue Economy Roadmap for Indonesia because this is actually the action plan that we would like to better manage and to create value added from the marine-based resources to improve our economic productivity in achieving inclusive and more sustainable economic development for Indonesia. We are partnering with Rise Plus, UN agency, and also Swedish agency and Econusa in preparing this Blue Economy Roadmap for Indonesia. And, you know, during the G20 presidency of Indonesia last year, Indonesia have leveraged the blue economy as a key focus area under the development working group discussion. And we noted that green economy, including blue economy and low carbon development and climate security is actually really associated with the global action to reduce carbon emission. And again, under the blue economy framework, we are not only addressing the traditional sectors, but we would like to uplift the role of traditional sectors to create a better growth and a more sustainable growth for Indonesia, such as from fishery, tourism, and manufacturing. But at the same time, not only uplifting the traditional sectors from the marine-based economy, but we also introducing the emerging sectors, such as renewable energy, R&D and education, bioeconomy, environment, and resource management. So therefore, blue economy is actually an opportunity for Indonesia and for the countries in the region to boost GDP growth while also achieving the SDGs. And also, blue economy can provide potentials to uplift the domestic value chain that can create a better prosperity for our people. So with that, this is actually the Blue Economy Roadmap 2023-2045. And this roadmap, the final version, will be launched in early July. And in the roadmap, we have a vision that our diverse coastal and marine resources are sustainably managed through a knowledge-led blue economy to create socio and economic prosperity, ensuring a healthy marine environment, and strengthen resilience for the benefit of current and future generations. We have 4 missions in our Blue Economy Roadmap. Mission number 1 is promoting sustainable economic growth. Mission number 2 is securing healthy, resilient, and productive oceans. Mission number 3 is human health, well-being, and shared prosperity. And mission number 4 is creating an enabling environment. So this is the priority sectors in the roadmap. We have uplifting traditional sectors and we have emerging sectors, including bioeconomy and biotechnology in it. And the Indonesian Blue Economic Index is also developed by Indonesia to really monitor the progress of blue economy development in Indonesia. Indonesia Blue Economy Index covered 3 pillars, environment, economy, and social pillars to ensure the sustainability and inclusivity of the blue economy. And this is actually one of the results of blue economy and the 3 pillars of the Blue Economy Index. And we can see that among the 7 regions, among the 34 provinces that Indonesia have, that East Java, South Sulawesi, and Maluku is among the top 3 provinces that have the highest index in blue economy. So blue economy development will be supported by cross-sectoral collaboration. Again, I would like to highlight here that blue economy is not only fishery sector, but blue economy is cover many sectors in it that related to the utilization of the ocean resources. And it also will involve many ministries and many agencies, even many stakeholders that can really put forward our effort together to utilize the ocean potentials for the shape of our future and better economic growth. So again, at the same time, BAPPENAS also developed the Blue Finance Strategy, which is the instrument that could finance later on for the implementation of Blue Economy Roadmap. And we also will utilize the available instruments of Blue Finance in Indonesia, such as bonds or capital markets, blended finance, philanthropy, financing, and insurance. So with that, I would like to also inform you on the last part of my presentation about the blue economy under the ASEAN chairmanship. Indonesia is now promoting the ASEAN Blue Economy Framework because we understand that ASEAN also covered by the sea. More than 65% of ASEAN area is also covered by the sea. So that's why blue economy in ASEAN also could be the new engine of growth. And at the same time, we also will build the common understanding about the importance of blue economy for ASEAN region. And we would like to recommitment and continuous engagement among the ASEAN member states to really put forward our effort for the blue economy to be the new engine of ASEAN economic growth. So ASEAN Blue Economy for the time being will cover blue science and data, blue science and technology, blue conservation and management, blue priority sectors, blue enablers, and aquaculture development, marine debris reduction, and capacity building. So we are having the timeline for the ASEAN chairmanship that early July will be organizing the first ASEAN Blue Economy Forum. And then we will seek endorsement from the ASEAN leaders by September 2023. So with that, I'll stop here, and then we really expect that have a very fruitful discussion for how blue economy can really contribute to the region and also to the achievement of net zero emission. Thank you very much.
So I might start down the end with Francesco and ask you if you could comment a little bit about the nature of your work and about how it bridges the area between the blue economy and the transition to net zero.
Let me start today with a bit of digression from the question. And I wanted to go back to this morning, and all our leaders were talking about economic growth and financial mechanism and investments and flow of finance. And I have to move them a little critic then. So I probably lost my job. So if everyone has a job for me tomorrow, please. But I haven't heard from from many of them a single word, which is nature. So this is the main ally that we have if you want to reach that net zero target. If you have read the IPCC report, it came out a couple of days ago, it's very, very bad. I mean, we are in real danger of missing the 1.5 degrees objective that we have. And then nature and ocean in particular are our probably last hope to have also to exceed the target, not just being net zero, but be net negative. That probably, if we are going to exceed that target, that's what we are going to need. So working with nature is, I think, the real possibility that we have to integrate all the targets that we have of economic growth, of climate resilience and mitigation, and regeneration of nature. That's, I think, our main issue, especially related to the blue economy. You know? And we have so many pillars that maybe we can discuss later a bit more in detail, all of them. I don't want to take so much time for everyone. But yeah, I want to emphasize this again. We can't achieve any growth, any economical growth, blue, green, or whatever it is, or net zero strategy without nature in it.
I'm going to skip across and ask Richard a question because it leads quite nicely into a lot of the work you do, I think. You are involved from the science all the way through to the policy and the project development. And I think that the Blue Halo project that you work on really looks at nature as its focus, but brings in so many of those other elements. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Okay, well, thanks so much, and thanks to ADB for pulling this together, and for especially this panel and inviting Conservation International. Thank you to Government of Indonesia and Ibu Amalia for your very inspiring introduction. You know, I heard these all of these plans and ambitions the Government of Indonesia are putting into place that are really driven by this idea of protecting nature, but also growing the economy. And you know, thanks for really highlighting this idea that nature is fundamental to the solution to the climate crisis, or if we don't address nature, we're all in trouble. You know, CI and others, Potsdam Institute released a report recently called the Exponential Roadmap for Nature-Based Solutions. Also, you could think of it as the carbon law for nature. And the idea is, even if we completely decarbonize you know, transportation, energy use, and so forth, you know, that's 60% of the solution. 40% is nature, land use. Right now, it's emitting 12 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere. In the next 25 years, that has to exponentially increase to being a net sink, you know, and by 2050, it has to go to minus 10, you know, a delta of 22 gigatons. You know, that's half of the Earth's carbon budget. You know, that's a huge task ahead, and it's easy to forget how important nature is. And oceans, the blue economy, are really the fundamental part of that. You know, the ocean. You know, one thing that Ibu Amalia highlighted was this idea that oceans are fundamental to the blue economy. One fact up there was oceans absorb 90% of the heat, of the excess heat. Just by the physical nature of water and how big oceans are, it's taking the brunt of climate change right now. And it's something that it's doing for free for all of us. And this is what underlies the 30% goal that has been put out by scientists. This idea that we need to protect 30% is because that's some sort of threshold where if oceans are functioning and 30% is protected as a proxy for healthy oceans, then oceans are able to absorb the heat and still be function and still be resilient. But oceans are also the least funded of all of nature. Right, SDG 14, I think the number is something like it takes $175 billion per year to reach, to hit this SDG, and only something like 5% of that is actually flowing to oceans. So it's a huge problem, but also a huge opportunity. And this is where Blue Halo comes in. We had the opportunity, at the G20 under Indonesia's leadership, to launch a project called Blue Halo S. And that was all about how do you drive ocean conservation and pay for it. Because one thing we know that, if you protect 30% of oceans, it costs money to go out and actually protect. It costs money to go out and do patrols, to really figure out what activities can happen. It takes capacity building to do that. It's not just parks in the sea, it really takes investment in oceans as infrastructure. And this is what these blue economy roadmaps and plans are all about. But one thing we do know about oceans is, and Blue Halo, is if you protect oceans, you protect fisheries, you do MPAs, your fisheries are gonna grow. And there'll be more fish to catch. You can actually, we know that for a fact. But, fisheries, the way they're managed, you could just catch all of the fish and draw it down and then put that money in the market and you get, a much bigger return than the 2 or 3% growth in fish. But the 2 or 3% growth in fish, to sustainably manage this, if we can keep that value on shore, to do things like, make sure that communities have access to that Indonesia is locally managing its resources, that the marine protected areas are managed by the communities that are using them, that capacity is built, that it's really an investment in these marine protected areas, and that's returning. And some of that growth, there's more fish to catch, there's economic growth, some of that should go back into protection, that there's this virtuous cycle. And Indonesia has this forward idea to create the regulations to actually enable that, to rather than just rent the waters out and let the dysregulation of fishery draw down the fish, that it will be well managed and some part of that return will come back to protection.
Thank you for that, Richard. I'm going to move on and ask Yann about some of the work that the French Development Agency have been supporting. They've had a long experience in financing blue carbon ecosystem conservation and restoration. So I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about some examples and lessons learned and how you're supporting governments in moving forward in this area.
So the question about the experience we can have, well, the concept of blue carbon is not that old, but still AFD has some experience in financing projects, supporting the restoration, conservation and sustainable management of blue carbon ecosystems, mostly mangroves. We have 14 projects in the current portfolio of AFD on blue carbon across the globe, in Africa, in America, in Pacific, in Asia, in China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Timor-Leste, Indonesia. Among these 14 projects, 7 are in the implementation phase, 5 in the inception phase, and 2 in the identification phase. So these 7 projects mobilize 70 million euro of AFD grants and loans. This is still a small number, but it's not nothing. So these 7 projects will allow the restoration of at least 4,000 hectares and protect at least 200,000 hectares of mangrove by 2025. Most blue carbons have been financed through grants so far, especially in Africa. and Latin America. But since we are discussing about ASEAN, I will pick examples in Southeast Asia. In this region, AFD has been financing blue carbon through blended loans and grants. For example, in Vietnam, we are financing a project to fight against coastal erosion in the Cà province through a 20 million loan blended with 3.8 grant from European Union delegated funds. A major component of the project consists in creating a coastal protection system based on the combination of grey and green infrastructures, the latter being the restoration and protection of the mangrove belt. In Cambodia, within a project aiming at supporting sustainable coastal and marine fisheries, along with ADB, which is lead in this project, AFD will finance activities aiming to restore natural habitat through mangrove replantation through 28 million euro loans. What we can see from these examples is that the main focus is not necessarily blue carbon itself. It can be coastal resilience and addressing natural catastrophes, risk disasters, biodiversity, sustainable fisheries, tourism. Financing blue carbon can come with many environmental and socio-economic benefits. The second main lesson learned is, of course, the difficulty to restore and conserve blue carbon ecosystems. Restoration requires in-depth studies for it to be successful, while the ecosystems should then be monitored, local communities involved to sustainably manage them. So there are many criteria to take into account for such projects to be successful. Regarding your second question about the action we can have with the government, let me find, yes. What we can do for supporting the government and what could be the outcomes we can expect of this project. So in general, we really appreciate to work at and support both policy level and investment in the field to make the connection between the global and the local levels. That's kind of specificity we can have as public development banks. Of course, we share that with ADB. We have lots of cooperation in that direction. So as of today, regarding policy dialogue around blue carbon, AFD is supporting the government of Indonesia, for example, through the Ministry of National Development Planning, the BAPPENAS, and the Indonesian Climate Change Trust Fund, ICCTF, with a grant of 620,000 euros. This support is running till 2023. So it aims at the integration of blue carbon ecosystems in the country's biodiversity and climate policies. It's done through the implementation of the Indonesian Blue Carbon Strategy Framework. The support will also focus on the improvement of the baseline, inventory and monitoring report verification capacity of national and subnational stakeholders. It is key not only to keep count of the contribution of blue carbon to the NDC, but also to access blue carbon credit. So in terms of perspectives, AFD is of course willing to support further the government of Indonesia, because we are in Indonesia, in the conservation and restoration of blue carbon. So we would be happy, for example, to discuss more potential projects focused on the conservation of blue carbon through a gender lens. We did not talk much about that today. Many studies show the key role that women are playing in the restoration and conservation of blue carbon ecosystems. We believe that through a gender-sensitive approach, we can achieve even more to preserve these ecosystems.
Thank you for that answer. And I'm going to move over to a question more on those financial elements. I had the pleasure of chatting to Anna earlier and learned an awful lot about carbon trading at the time. And the question I guess I have for her links in how that we bridge these short-term granting programs into a long-term sustainable economic basis for a lot of these projects. And so I'm going to ask her firstly, how a credit trading marketplace works, but more specifically, how this can be used to enable blue carbon market transactions and permanence.
So I'm the commercial director at Climate Impact X, and we are setting up trading platforms in order to scale voluntary carbon markets. I think one of the reasons why voluntary carbon markets can really have an important part to play in blue carbon is that we are really looking to unlock private financing. So corporates that would like to finance, and it's not just governments and ADB and other big, large institutions that come with government money, but basically private funding is really what the voluntary carbon market is all about. And in that sense, it's interesting to maybe just give you an example of who the players are that we're talking to on our Climate Impact X and what we're trying to do. So, for example, to have a marketplace, of course, you would need a buyer. So the buyers that we're talking to is everything from a small corporate that would like to maybe offset the carbon emissions from their events or business travel, all the way up to large shipping companies, for example, that know that without voluntary carbon market, it's going to be really hard for them to meet their pledges that they've made from, say, 2030 to 2050. So we are talking to them on the buy side, and they come to us because they want to buy high integrity carbon credits. On the sell side, we're talking to project developers, I guess more or less the same people that you talk to as well. But what they have realized, many of them coming from an NGO kind of background, that the NGO system, you basically raise capital on a yearly basis, and it makes it really hard to implement programs, especially when it comes to communities, it comes to biodiversity. And they have found their way to voluntary carbon markets to get that extra financing where they can actually finance all the way to, say, 10, all the way to 60 years at some of these voluntary carbon projects that will last for. They will get a lot more insight into what that funding will look like if we have a transparent market. So what we are trying to do is move the whole market from an OTC, very opaque pricing system to actually trading on screen and almost making the voluntary carbon market into a commodity. Once we have a transparent price, we will also be able to unlock financing that comes from banks, for example, because at this point of time, they don't know if they're going to finance a project, what the carbon will actually be trading at going forward. So what we're hoping at Climate Impact X, we have one of our shareholders, which is SGX, so maybe you saw Harry this morning on stage. So what we're hoping is that we will be able to create a carbon price that will act as a benchmark, and hopefully SGX or another exchange will come and we will be able to create futures. And that's when we really think that we can untap a lot of finance going into this market. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I want to take that and redirect us back to nature, which is where we sort of started this discussion, and ask Francesco that with more permanence of finance coming in, where are the gaps in the blue economy and in its linkage with net zero for nature moving forward? What should we be focusing on and looking at?
So there is a huge gap in what's needed in terms of investing in nature and in blue carbon. And honestly, being a scientist, I would say I don't know where we get this money. It's something we need to ask to our financial specialists and economists. And so I was also thinking maybe the old system of analyzing investment and considering revenues does not apply in this case, because the way that we are focusing on, I was listening about GDP growth and economic growth, and so we can't expect that investing in mangrove restoration will have the same amount of revenues that you have from, I don't know, deep mining. That's not going to happen, right? So I think it's very important first to shift our target. GDP is important, but we should not be focused of everything. We can have activities that don't contribute to the GDP growth, but contribute to the blue economy anyway. That could be, Yann was mentioning, for example, this project that ADB and AFD are co-financing in Cambodia is on sustainable fisheries. The focus of the project is not fishing more, it's fishing better. Fishing less and fishing better. That means that people, coastal communities, will have the same amount of revenues by selling better products instead of just fishing out everything. That, of course, is not sustainable in a long time. And that's important. And a part of this is, for example, also creating barriers for trawlers to go in protected areas, like just dumping very big block of cement in the water so the nets cannot go there. And that solves partially, for example, the patrolling part. So the reducing costs. So all these activities that we can include, they don't necessarily imply big financial flows or dramatic increase in GDP, because they were not going to be captured in it. But now, anyway, they're going to be important, like also mentioning nature on coastal resilience. Of course, if you build a huge seawall in front of your village, you're going to spend a lot of money. That's going to be reflected in the GDP in some way. If you build mangroves, you won't see any substantial increase in the GDP, but the damage that will be absorbed by these mangroves is important. And another thing that we can think about, since we are talking about blue carbon and blue carbon credits, in some countries like in the Pacific, they are thinking of using a carbon credit derived from growing mangroves to actually fund the premium of insurance against natural disasters. That's another way. We need to be, a bit more creative and maybe going out a bit from this old financial modeling and economic analysis of a specific project and see a bigger picture, a bit separated from the pure economic growth, I think.
Thank you. That bigger picture makes me want to ask Richard a question about how important is it to be incorporating as many of the SDGs as possible into these coastal projects that we're doing, and how important is it to be looking at all the sectors in one project as opposed to looking at individual sectors in isolation to each other?
To respond to that question, and also to these insights about GDP growth and sustainability, really. And what are we really trying to do here? I think a big thing that we're trying to do is build these economies that help the most vulnerable people who often live on the coast. And in this part of the world, in Southeast Asia, that makes them even more vulnerable. A place like the Philippines, there's typhoons hit that place, and it's just devastating. And the poorest people clear mangroves and live right on the coastline where they're so exposed to it. So this is where integration really becomes important. Thinking about how do you, there was a session about how do you design communities, how do you design cities? How do you think about the nature elements to that and building economies, building food security? In many ways, our Blue Halo project, it's not a conservation project. It's a food security project. Fisheries produce, some huge percentage of Indonesia's protein. I've seen numbers in the 70–80% range. These fisheries collapse, and it's a national security issue. People starve. So managing these fisheries, for these vulnerable communities is an important strategic thing for the country. And it's not about GDP growth, it's about hitting all of these SDG goals at once. And nature really provides the fundamental basis for that.
And I couldn't agree more. I'm going to move back to Yann now, and I'm going to find my spot here. And I am going to ask him, in light of sort of all these elements, how is it that development banks such as yours can support all the different actors in developing a blue carbon finance ecosystem?
Well, in general, public development banks are providing funding, but of course it's not the whole story. Provide funding to fulfill all the gaps which could be found in the market, but also make research, raise consciousness, and finance capacity building and so on. So it's a wide range of potential activities, but in this specific blue carbon finance ecosystem, I would say that we can play different roles. First, provide early stage financing and risk mitigation facilities, in particular at this stage when voluntary carbon market standards, monitoring, reporting, verification methodologies are still developing and need harmonization. Public development banks can play a pioneer role to get the issuance of carbon credit from their project in order for them to leverage more and more private sector investments. public development banks can be cornerstone investors or catalysts. The second role, I would say, would be to have public policy support and feed the dialogue, implementing policy actions in order to develop consistent policies. It has been mentioned earlier today in different sessions with regards to blue carbon and voluntary carbon markets, of course, in this field. And I would say the third thing would be to create revenues from nature. So I think these two notions are not incompatible, hence strengthen an economic model for this kind of project. So the income generated out of the credits allow a return on investment from conservation or restoration projects. Thus, project finance so far mostly through grants could be more and more financed through loans, and then this could multiply the amount of financing for blue carbon, including the one from donors, and significantly scale up the blue carbon conservation and restoration ambition with an increased amount of money invested. So that I would say that these three main roles could be the ones we could play.
Yeah, thanks. I think that really emphasizes this idea that the blue economy, especially blue carbon, has huge potential, to return revenues to these vulnerable communities and to Southeast Asia. Indonesia's got something like 20% of the blue carbon assets worldwide. These are very rare ecosystem types. Especially mangroves, like 15-20% of the mangroves in the world are right here. But blue carbon as a class, even just the science of it is pretty new. It's like even just 2 years ago, CI and others, worked in Colombia to, with Vera to create the VM0007, the mangrove blue carbon standard for the voluntary carbon market. And there are no other projects that are credit producing yet. There's a lot in development. But mangroves are not the only blue carbon asset. So I think doing the underlying science can really drive both investment and value creation. And that's what I believe we really need to do. Blue carbon is not just mangroves, it's salt marshes, it's seagrass, it's deep coastal ecosystems, it's benthic systems, it's kelp forests. Indonesia is the second largest commodity producer of seaweed in the world. There's huge potential there in blue carbon. And these are all the kind of things that we need to understand from a basic science point of view to develop the understanding so that we can create credible credits that can trade and we can bring in capital markets and sell on the Singapore market. But we need to do the science on a myriad of things before that happens, and I think that's something that we can pull together and do.
I think that there is a big gap between people like trading carbon credits and the scientists. They don't talk each other. No, I was in Montreal for the UN CBD. There were people talking about biodiversity credits and carbon credits, derivatives paid in cryptocurrencies, and that was super scary. So, because what is this about? And we are missing the link sometimes between what's the verification of carbon credits and the science which is behind it. That's, I think, is a very important gap that we should try to fill. Thank you.
Absolutely. And, there's that element of we need more science, but we also don't have time to wait. So it's, it's a very difficult space that we're sitting in. I've been watching Anna nod to most of the things that have been said, so I'm going to ask her a couple of questions. And one of them is just generally, if you'd like to comment on anything that was said, that would be really welcome. But the other is obviously it's important to progress this. So where are we sitting at the moment with the current state of carbon marketplaces, and what's the potential moving forward for blue carbon?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And yes, of course, I'm sitting nodding because I do think that these kind of sessions that we're having here is great because we are getting to meet, from the scientist perspective to more of a commodity market where I'm coming from. So I think it's great to sit here and share experiences and what we're seeing. What we did do actually at the Climate Impact X in November was that we had a big auction of blue carbon credits. So we did have a project from Pakistan. It's the world's largest project of blue carbon credits. So we had an auction in November, and we saw a lot of interest, a lot of buyers, shipping industry, banks, commodity traders, and others that were interested in buying blue carbon credits. So I think it's got a great potential. There's definitely demand. People are interested in supporting blue carbon. They understand the very important, both from carbon sequestration and also the restoration of mangroves. So this was a project in the Sindh province in Pakistan. The project is large. It's 350,000 hectares. It's more or less 5 times the size of Singapore. And we had the auction because we wanted to send a price signal to the market that it's actually worth doing these projects and what type of price that you can get for these carbon credits. So we managed to get a price which is around $30. And that, if you compare to the forestry projects that are out there and are selling in the market at around 10 to 15 and thereabouts, so almost double for the blue carbon. And we were talking about that earlier as well, that could be, of course, a symptom of that there isn't actually that many projects. There are projects underway, but of course we have to realize that blue carbon is a very small part. If you look at the carbon sinks around the world, and if you compare them to the tropical forests, they're obviously more efficient, but there's more tropical forests out there. So these blue carbon credits are really selling at a premium, and it goes to show how important people and the buyers in this instance actually thought that these credits are worth. And I think that's one important area for us at Climate Impact X to highlight and to really send that pricing signal out so that people like yourselves can go out and fund these projects, because you know that there will actually be a revenue that will come back to these projects even going forward. And talking about the second question, where carbon markets are at this point of time, we are a very fragmented market. It's a very illiquid, very opaque market, and that's again something that we are trying to change. We're trying to bring more transparency into the markets, and I think we're actually at a very interesting point at this time, because what we're seeing now compliance markets really waking up. So after COP 26, all the politicians and others went back to their home countries and decided and started to understand how are we actually going to play in this market under Article 6. So we are now seeing compliance schemes coming up in we're seeing basically a change of some compliance schemes that were already operating, so Australia, New Zealand, Korea. We're seeing new compliance schemes coming in like India, Japan. We're seeing tax incentives, so we're having a carbon tax in Singapore next year that will come into play. So I think at this point of time, with Article 6 and the Paris Agreement really coming to life in 2 years' time, we will see much more of a merger between the compliance market and the voluntary carbon markets. And I think, again, we will see a flow of finance coming into these projects because of that, because we're still finding our feet now exactly what types of credits that will come under these compliance schemes. But yeah, it's really an interesting time in voluntary carbon markets at this point.
Yeah, just to jump in quickly again, speaking of Singapore, we've started, and speaking of science, CI and others have kicked off with government of Singapore with support from Amazon. We've started what we're calling the International Blue Carbon Institute. And this is a group of scientists worldwide together with practitioners to do projects on the ground, not just to do science in some ivory tower sort of sense, but to really do practical application of blue carbon scientists, learn as we go, and then build the capacity in places like Indonesia, places like Philippines, and throughout the region in the Pacific, to actually put people to work doing this job. Because we need these young people, the best and brightest, to learn how to do this and take it to the next level. And speaking of that, it's not just like figuring out how much like mangroves or sequestering and measuring in mud. It's very like practical, innovative type of things. Like one of our staff here in Bali, Pakatut, he has a farm. And he also works out in the ocean. He's a long-time diver and ocean conservationist, helped lead our work in the Bird's Head seascape and create marine protected areas. But the cool idea here is that you take seaweed, which is common, and it could be an agricultural amendment. So you sort of get the double, even triple benefits of the seaweed and the carbon it's sequestering, and then the increased productivity of food production on land. So huge potential for entrepreneurship and innovation in this blue carbon space as well.
We see a lot of organisations say that they've got money to fund coastal projects, and we see a lot of coastal projects that need funding, but we're not seeing enough of that money getting through. I'm wondering if anybody on the panel, I'm going to throw this open, has some ideas how we can enhance the area in between, beyond capacity building, obviously, of individuals, to get more of that funding through to those coastal initiatives that need it. And how they can be broadened across, to encompass both mitigation, adaptation, and the various other elements that we look for in our coastal areas.
The risk of building in coastal areas increases. So it's very difficult for investors probably coming and then invest in something that have a very high risk of being taken down by the next storm. So what, for example, ADB, in collaboration with other organizations, is piloting, and the Global Environment Facility is financing this, is a study on coral reef insurance. A parametric insurance has been already piloted in the Caribbean, in Mexico, I think. What they are trying to do is a bit different, because of course, Mexico was a very high private sector presence in terms of hotels and resorts that were able to pay the premium of the insurance. Now, when we are going to talk about, protecting Tubataha Reef in the middle of the Philippines, there is no resort. So is the government able to pay for the premium? Maybe not. Right. So all these studies, one is the Philippines, another one is, I think, here in Indonesia and South Sulawesi, Solomon Island, and Fiji. All different settings. So we are going to finance this study that will use a parametric insurance that will repair the coral. Actually, if the wind, for example, is higher than a certain value, the insurance will pay immediately. Then people can go and repair the reef. So that will probably lower the risk for investors as well, knowing that if something happened, part of the risk got delegated to an insurance part. That's I think, a good example, at least for coastal areas.
That question of risk is something I'd like to talk to or ask Anna about, because the element of risk and how the market can ameliorate this for investors is something that I think is really progressive moving forward. Could you remark on that?
It's interesting, of course, hearing about insurance companies, and this is something that we're hearing and seeing a lot now as well in voluntary carbon markets, that there are insurance companies coming in and want to play basically in the voluntary carbon market space as well, and be able to help different risks from what we were talking about of the project, because there are, of course, risks there. But, of course, what we are hoping to do at CIX is that we want to create a benchmark price for voluntary carbon. And again, the risk tool there would be if we could get a futures contract, as I mentioned earlier, that potentially SGX, our shareholder, would be able to come in and create a futures contract. So that would, of course, be able to, you would, as an investor, if you want to invest in a project, you could actually use that forward market. So if we look at carbon as a commodity and you compare to, for example, the metals industry, you would have the big mining companies coming in and they would get financing from banks. What would happen, of course, if the mining company goes bankrupt? What the bank sits with is a collateral, which is the metal in the ground that has maybe not been mined yet, but they can basically get another mining company to come in and get that out for them. The collateral is a metal, and they know where that is being priced because they basically have got that forward market to look at the same time as they can also put in hedges in place. So if the price would fall, you can actually sell forward on the futures market so that you can hedge your investment. And I think that is something that, again, if we can get the voluntary carbon market to come in and create a benchmark, we can get a futures price, we will be able to see a lot more investments happening because you have got that risk management tool that we're seeing, for example, in the metals industry when you're investing in a metal, in a mine, or if you're an oil company and you're investing in another type of asset. So I think that's where we at CIX would like to see the market going. I think that would really, again, untap a lot of financing.
Hi, Benjamin Castillo. So actually, I have too many questions to ask, so let me just pick one. So first, just one comment. So I heard a lot about market, about prices, about carbon. But for example, one thing I would have wished to hear more today is, for example, planetary limits. It seems that climate change is a symptom of a wider and bigger problem that requires a systemic approach, and I think we are crucially missing this. But anyway, that's just a comment I wanted to make. I personally have quit my corporate career 7 years ago. I was very well paid because I realized I was part of the problem. Since then, I have completely changed my life to be part of the solution, and I'm losing everything that I gain in the process. Very often when I talk to my friends, they say, oh, you're so courageous, but there's no money in doing the right thing. So what it seems is that we have an incentive system that doesn't encourage people to actually act or to really fix our problems, to be part of the solution, to do things that are great for humanity, for the commons. We have an incentive system that puts us in competition to consume and produce more. And so my question to you is, how do we change that incentive system that is encouraging people not to do what is needed for sustainable futures, but actually more like the opposite, that perpetuates patterns that are unsustainable? Thank you.
I can try to answer, because it's a good question. Thank you very much. So I would say I can agree that we are the problem. That's sure. I think a very important part of this becoming the solution is for removing the dangerous subsidies. For example, we know that high ocean fleet are heavily subsidized by many governments. That will allow to have cheap fish for our Western countries like me to afford fish that otherwise wouldn't be sustainable. So that all this kind of money, subsidies to fossil fuels, subsidies to long-distance fishing, are harmful subsidies that need to be removed and transfer to more nature-friendly activities. In that way, probably part of the huge revenues that these big companies have will be cut, and we could move. Again, I'm not a financial specialist or an economist, but I believe that removing the subsidies and readdress them in more nature-positive kind of investment could be a very important first step in addressing this problem. I don't know if any of my colleagues...
Yeah, can I jump in? I think this comes back to this idea of risk that we ended it with. It's like how, especially how the private sector, how banks think about risk, to me is insane, honestly. It's like, you know, at CI, we've just started up a private sector carbon investment fund called Icaria Natural Capital with Schroders. And we're trying to raise money and place it into high quality carbon projects all over the region, you know, because supply, especially in nature-based solutions, is very limited. And these credit-producing projects that really return to communities are rare. They're hard to do. It's a lot of work. But carbon financing should be able to pay for that. But everybody, you know, you talk to, they'll talk a big game about, oh yeah, we're so invested in like being part of the solution and not part of the problem. But then when you actually talk about investing, they say, well, what's your IRR? It's like, well, you know, it looks like it could be 5, 6, 7%, and they just shake their head, right? They need double-digit returns for something that really doesn't return double digits, that we're not doing it for return for you. In fact, if we're getting double-digit returns, we would probably really want to take some of that and put it back to the communities, right? Because they're the ones who are living in and around nature, and they're the ones who are protecting nature or not. And we want to create these systems where the communities really benefit equitably. You know, this idea of gender and equality and benefiting from protection, being the ones who protect it. But yet, financial institutions won't put their money where their mouth is in terms of investment. We're seeing the same thing, around, lots of other factors. It's just like a lot of talk, but not a lot of, actually putting money in. And then at the same time, I see these financial institutions, will put in, huge investment into crypto. Just like 6 months ago, everybody was like so excited about crypto, and then, FTX and all these things melted down, and everyone just wrote off those losses and pretended like it never happened. So nobody talks about that kind of risk, and then these commercial banks just fail. Like Credit Suisse, Credit Suisse, Silicon Valley Bank, they make bad decisions, they sort of, act badly culturally, but, those are real risks. But the risk of exceeding these planetary boundaries, of the collapse of nature, that's so much bigger of a risk than like a few banks failing and then having this domino effect in the financial system. It's like exceeding the planetary boundaries and nature failing is an existential risk to all of us, and that should supersede a lot of this idea about where to put capital.
Well, thank you for the very interesting discussion. My name is Burkhard Hinz. I work for KfW, German promotional bank. I'm heading the office in Jakarta. One short comment to what Richard just said is I'm actually not that pessimistic that private commercial banks are opening up for the market when it comes to climate change and getting a kind of green reputation. I at least observe that a couple of banks are opening up in that regard. But my other comment is particularly, as we all notice, climate change, we always say that time is critical. The same applies for marine debris and many other things. And at the same time, what I also notice is what is probably needed is that governments are opening up. Yeah? So that there's a much stronger commitment from the government side. I've seen a number of projects where the even grant funding has lapsed after 5 years because it was not possible to realize a project as such. Although these are not projects which are nice to have, but all projects where everyone would agree this is to the real benefit of the people and to the country. And it becomes even more complicated when we talk about loan-based projects. And here what is also needed, I really hope that, for example, what the Deputy Minister said in her opening remarks, that Indonesia, for example, is very much dynamic now and has very ambitious objectives when it comes to green and blue economy. And but things have to be done. And the government, of course, plays a very crucial role in this.
I don't know if it's a question of or just a statement, but I agree with what you said. And there are a few governments that now are really stepping up. Of course, the most vulnerable, like the Pacific, are much more involved in this discussion compared to others. Indonesia is as well one of the more prominent figures in that. So I think if there is hope. I don't know. Sometimes you lose hope when you see that there is no money where your heart is. I'll give an example. We have this. I don't know if you read in the news. There is this big tanker that is about to sink or explode out of Yemen, and nobody wants to touch it because it's too expensive. Not thinking that when you're going to sink, you're going to spend 10 times more money to clean the oil spill. And I believe that some government start understanding that this is better act now than covering the damage later. But
I'm Jared. I'm from an organization that does reforestation carbon credits, and we're trying to do things right, but there's so many bad projects on the market that are bringing a ton of bad press. So my question for Anna is, what are you doing for due diligence for the carbon credits you sell? And then on the buyer side, are you trying to encourage retirement versus just trading and just endlessly selling these credits? There's not actually a real climate impact.
That's a great question. On the last question, yes, we are encouraging retirement for sure. And we are getting a lot of questions from corporates as well about that, exactly that question about the secondary market. And I had an interesting discussion with one lady from a shipping company, and she said, "Oh, I don't like all that trading." And then I said, "Okay, so you have invested yourself in a conservation project. And if you will not need all those credits from that project, then what are you going to do with them?" And she said, "Oh, maybe I can come to your platform and sell them to someone else." And then I said, "Well, then you're part of that secondary market." So I do think that there is a space for a secondary market, both for project developers, of course, that will sell to people that will retire, but there will also be a marketplace for credits that basically haven't found a home yet. But of course, what we're hoping is that all these credits will find a home and that they will ultimately be retired. In one way, I think what we could potentially hope is that this whole market actually at one point will disappear, because we don't need any offsets anymore, because we're actually already preserved and we are not having any need for voluntary carbon credits. Fingers crossed that day will come. But in the meantime, I do think that there is a marketplace. I think what we are really hoping for is, again, that price transparency that we're having on. We have 3 different platforms. So we have the auction platform where we had the Delta Blue auction, and we have the exchange that we're building to create more of a benchmark. And then we also have a marketplace where you can just come and buy and retire credits. So we're trying to really target most segments of the market. On the curation bit, yes, CIX, we are having a technical director. We have an international advisory council where we have a lot of experts, such as these gentlemen, that are much more familiar than me in basically the technicalities of carbon markets. So we have also, of course, working closely with rating agencies that are coming into the market. So we're working with Silvera, and we're talking and having a lot of discussions with Calix and B0 and other third parties that are coming into this market to rate projects. And the key thing here for us is not necessarily to be the judge of what is good quality and what is not, but at least to give the buyers on our platform as much information as possible about the projects, so that they in turn can take the decision based on really all the information that is out there. So we have a curation that we are doing on the platform, so what types of projects that we have. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you all. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our 4 speakers today. It has been a really engaging conversation with everybody from such different areas. It's been absolutely fabulous. I guess my takeaway messages are the importance of keeping nature central to all these discussions, but to pursue transformation and finance in as quick a way as possible. One of the elements that was mentioned this morning was that development and decarbonisation can and should always go hand in hand, and I think that the blue area is one of those spaces where that can be pursued immediately. So thank you all for coming today, and with that we close the session.